Hi everyone, welcome back, and it's the fourth video of Spring Security video series. In the last video, we learned JWT library and created a utility class and added the required methods like generate token, validate token, extract username, and token expiry. If you are new to this channel, please watch earlier three videos of Spring Security to connect the dots and to understand the flow of Spring. This will be the last video of Spring Security implementation. So today we will learn and implement JWT authentication filter and return the token from login post REST API after validating the username and password of the user. Let's create a authentication filter. In order to create a filter, create a class, name it as JWT request filter. At the class level, use annotation at the rate component. So here we need to extend from inbuilt class once per request filter. So here we can see it is a public abstract class once per request filter, and it's a part of web.filter package. So here we need to override its methods to implement its method do filter internal. So here we have to add our logic in the do filter internal. So first of all, we have to forward the request to the actual resource. For this, we need to use filter chain reference created here and need to use the method do filter and need to pass request and response object. So here we used three objects: filter chain, request, response. So all these objects we will get from the signature of the method. Like here it's a request, response, and filter chain objects we are saving in this method. So next, in order to verify this filter is working or not, just add a log here. So we will use system.out.println and add any message. Now we have to register this filter in the security configuration class. Open security configuration class, and here we need to do and update some configurations here. So first of all, disable the form login, that basically a default UI provided by the Spring Security. And next we need to use add filter before here, and here we need to pass filter reference. We will create it above, and here also we need to pass a reference of inbuilt class username and password authentication filter. Now create this reference in the constructor. Create a constructor here. So here we created one constructor of this security configuration class and initialize this JWT request filter object reference. So this is the filter we just created here. We disabled form login. It is default provided by Spring Security, and added the filter by using add filter before method. We pass the reference, and along with the reference we need to pass a reference of username password authentication filter dot class. It's inbuilt. Another change here, basically earlier we used in-memory database to authenticate the user. So here we need to comment out these configurations as well. And second, here we created a method list user. Also we need to comment out or remove from this security configuration class, because now we will authenticate a user from the database. Now save the changes, execute the application and test the functionality. Application started successfully. Now clear the console logs and using the postman hit the login endpoint. Look into the logs. So here we are able to see a log filter working. This log we added in the JWT request filter at line number 16. So it means our filter is working as expected. Now we need to move into the actual implementation of this filter. So in this filter we have to achieve two things. One is, whenever a request comes into this filter, we need to check a request and verify that this request is having a header authorization. If this request is having a authorization header, only then we will validate a token coming in the request. So now here create a method verify authentication header. From the request, get a header authorization. It will return a string. Now here we need to check that this header is exists or not. So how we will check? We will check the auth header string variable is null or not. So we can use optional and invoke a method of nullable. Auth header dot is present, and this authorization header value must start with a text bearer. So if request is having a authorization header and the value of this authorization header is started with bearer, only then we can say this request is having a valid authorization header. And if these both conditions satisfy, first is header is in the request and second it start from the bearer, then we will return true from this method, otherwise we will return false. Now in the do filter internal method in the filter, we will call this method. Now we have completed first task. Now second is, if the request is having a valid JWT token, then we need to validate it. So another method we need to create, which will responsible to validate a token. So again, here we need to fetch the authorization header. Then from the authorization header value, we will extract the actual token value. So basically authorization header value always start from bearer. So these 7 characters we are excluding from the value, and rest of the part will be JWT token. So that token will be stored in the variable token here. Now we have it valid token. We need to extract the username from the token. So here we will make use of a utility class we created in the last video of Spring Security. Now AutoWire, a utility. So here using this utility we will call a method extract username, and we need to pass a valid token. Now we have a username. Next is we need to verify that username is valid and not null, and also need to check security context holder is not having any existing object related to the security. So we will use here if condition. First condition will be to check username is not null. And second condition will be, so here we added 2 conditions. One is we are checking that this username is not null and having a value, and second thing is user not logged in yet and the security context holder has no authentication object. So if both conditions satisfy, then we need to get and extract user object from the database. So for getting the user detail from the database, we already created user detail service. Now auto-wire it. Using this user detail service reference, we will invoke a method load user by username, and we'll pass this username. It will return object of type user details. Need to import this class and then validate the token. A utility has a method validate token. Need to call it and also need to pass token here. So if the token is valid, then we need to set the object in the security context holder. So here we need to create another method, update security context holder. Here we need user details information and HTTP servlet request. Here we need to use username password authentication token class and need to pass here user details and authorities. Then set the request. So we created one own method, update security context holder, which will receive user details object and HTTP servlet request object. So in this method, we created an object of username password authentication token class and pass the user details and authorities coming in the user details. Then we need to set a request in this object. So here we used a method set details, and using web authentication details source class, we invoke a method build details and pass the request. And this method we need to call from here. So here we need to pass user detail and request object. We have done with the JWT request filter. Now we have to update employee controller, and here we need to update the login API. So here we need to perform three things. First of all, we have to authenticate provided username and password using authentication manager. And if the user credentials are valid, then we need to fetch the user from the database. And on the basis of the database user, we need to generate and return the JWT token in the response. Let's get started. So here we need to auto-wire authentication manager. And in the security configuration file, we need to provide custom initialization of this authentication manager. So open security configuration and provide the custom initialization. So this is a simple steps to provide custom initialization of authentication manager. Then go to the controller. We have already auto-wired authentication manager and use this reference to validate the user. Here we need to use a class username password authentication token. And need to pass username and password. So authentication manager will authenticate the username and password from the DB. If credentials not matching with the database, so it will throw bad credentials exception. If the credentials are valid, then we are fetching the user from the database on the basis of username, and then we need to use JWT utility class. So here we need to auto-wire this utility class as well. So this is a utility class we created in the previous videos. So it provides a method generate token. We need to pass the username. So this generate token method will generate the token on the basis of this DB user, and this token we need to return in the response. So in this login endpoint, we updated it according to the JWT authentication, and we achieved 3 points. First, we authenticate the username and password from the DB. If user is valid, then we loading the user from the DB, and if the user returns from the DB on the basis of that DB username, we generated the token, and same token we are returning in the response. So this is a very simple implementation of login endpoint, and it is responsible to return JWT token if the provided credentials are valid. Save the changes and execute the application. Application successfully started. Now open the Postman and try this login endpoint. So admin is the valid username and password. Now we are getting JWT token successfully with the valid username and password. Now let's try with the invalid username. So here we are getting 401 unauthorized access. means credentials are not valid. Now let's try with the invalid password as well. So here it's not behaving as expected, because if username or password invalid, it should not return the JWT token. So let's see the controller. So if the credentials are not valid, it will generate bad credential exception here, and in the catch block we need to throw the exception. If the credentials are not valid, then bad credential exception will occur and the control will come to the catch block. So here we need to return status forbidden along with the message access denied. Now save the changes. Now application started. Let's re-execute the endpoint with valid username and password. It is observed that the login controller is still not working with the valid username and password. So let's restart the application and open the H2 console to verify what is the exact username and password in the database. So go to the users table and verify the records. So here we can say the username and password both are admin. Now here is one problem. If we go to the security configuration file, so see at line number 56, we provided custom initialization of password encoder, and this Spring Security is using bcrypt password encoder, but our password in the database is in the plain text. It is in the plain text. So this is the problem. So here we need to use the encoded password. Then how we can encode this password? So open your utility class, and in the main method, or just create a main method, and here we need to create an object of bcrypt password encoder and use a reference of password encoder interface. Using this reference, call a method encode, and here you can pass any plain text that you want to encode. So here suppose I want to encode admin. So just run this main method. We printed it in the console. So this is the encoded value corresponding to admin password. Now copy and update in the database. Similarly, we have a second user, manager. Also create encrypted password for manager as well. So here this is the encoded value related to manager password. Also update this value in the DB. So now admin and manager both users have encoded password in the database. Now let's try with the invalid username and password. 401 unauthorized. Try with valid username and password. It's working perfectly. The issue was in the DB we were storing the password in the plain text, whereas we need to store password in encoded form.